I think that we have already people joining in from around the world. So thank you so much, everyone who's joining to this conversation. We are joined today by a very, very special guest whom I'm going to introduce in a little bit. But first, I'm going to start by talking about the AI for Climate initiative and why we're hosting this lightning talk series. And the AI for Climate initiative aims to harness the power of artificial intelligence to understand a little bit more how to fight against climate change, how to make efforts for conservation, and how to understand how to join multi-sectorial efforts in this very, very important task, which is to take care of the planet. So you can find more information about this event that we're going to host, the Global Forum, on the 25th and 26th of November in forclimate.ai/forum, where you can already register. The registration is open. And right now, I am really, really happy to welcome our guest today. His name is Sylvain Carle, and he's the director of the second Muse. And Sylvain has a lot of experience on investment on AI startups. He has been working with top accelerators around Canada. And he's going to tell us a little bit more about specifically AI startups and how to invest in them and why investing in AI startups is important. And more so than that, he's going to be telling us about climate change and about why investing as well in climate tech is going to be the future of investment. So Sylvain, I am so happy that you're here today. Welcome to this webinar, and the microphone is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Happy to be here with you all this morning. I'm going to share a little bit with you. Let me put my screen up, share my screen. So you should see my screen now. Yes, as mentioned in the intro, I've been thinking and investing in AI startups for at least 5 years now, I would say. At the time I was at Real Venture, which is a seed stage fund based in Montreal, $150 million fund. And in 2015, 2016, we were shaping our thesis to identify why and how we would invest in AI, and came up with this vision of finding where the different techniques of AI could be applied. And so this morning, my goal with you in this lightning talk is really to briefly introduce a framework to think about how to evaluate different opportunities to apply AI and machine learning and deep learning, and then give you some examples in other industries, reuse the same framework to think about climate tech in general. So where could we apply AI in the context of climate? And then give you some inspiration from startups that I've seen in the last few years that would totally fit in under this climate innovation umbrella. Let me start quickly, just providing you some links if you want to connect with me after. As I said, I've been an investor for 6 years now, and for the 15 prior year, an entrepreneur, mostly based in Montreal, but went to work twice in Silicon Valley in San Francisco. The last time I was there, 2012 to 2014, I was a senior developer advocate for Twitter in San Francisco. So I've always been co-founder, CTO, using technologies to enable businesses, but also to enable goals. How could you achieve major goals and strategic goals using technologies? So that's been my background. My nickname is Frog in the Valley. I'm francophone, so I speak français in my daily life. I work in English, but I was born and raised in French. So that's sort of like the pun intended, or the self-deprecating humor in calling myself the frog in the valley, which is a term that we use for French people sometimes. Because they would eat frog legs to the despair of their English-speaking colleagues. What happened this year, I just want to give this brief intro. After 6 years of being a technology seed stage and pre-seed stage startup investor, active VC, having done more than 20 investments in the last 5 years directly, but Real Ventures now has about 250 companies that are still active after 10 years of investing. Really come to a point where I wanted to do more impact investing, and some of the most interesting projects and founders I was meeting didn't totally fit only squarely in the tech startups definition that we had at Real Ventures. So I came across this graph, and I thought, let's try to combine what I love, what I'm good at, what the world needs, and what I could be paid for, important too, and find my ikigai, right? Really find my sweet spot, and really wanted to put all of my energy and my time to work for the climate crisis, which I thought is the challenge of the 21st century. By the way, it was the challenge of the 20th century, but we missed it. So it's now the challenge of the 21st century. So this idea of focusing on climate, and I have been working on a partnership in the prior year with the folks at Second Muse. Second Muse is a US-based company, but has been deploying projects globally now for the last 10 years, and really joined forces with them to work on climate impact and raising a fund. So currently fundraising a new fund to invest in entrepreneurs that are developing solutions to both solve the climate crisis, although I know we won't solve it completely, but make it, let's call it, make it better, even though we can't solve everything, but also thinking about adaptation. So we might slow down climate change. We probably won't reverse it completely. And we'll also need to take care of people who will bear the consequences of climate change, of the climate crisis. And that's more on the social side. So good friend of mine, Patrick, who's at the House of Social Innovation here in Montreal, says that social challenges, social impact is the reverse of the same coin of environmental impact. So if we don't take care of the environment, we'll have even more social problems, social challenges to tackle. So keeping that in mind. I won't go through the details, but if you want to go
Sylvain, I think that we have a technical issue with Sylvain's connection, so let me try to get him back for a second. Yes, apologies everyone. I think we've lost his connection for a second. So we are going to be waiting for him to come back. I think that this topic is super interesting for all of us to understand a little bit more on how investing in climate change and how investing in climate tech startups is important around the world. And Second Muse, as he was saying, is one of the companies in the US that is focusing on specifically investment on AI startups. Started with a focus on artificial intelligence, and now they're going into climate tech investment. So let's give him another minute to come back. Please stay with us, and we will be back shortly. In the meantime, if there are any questions at all regarding this specific topic or regarding the forum, feel free to jump into the Q&A functionality of the webinar on Zoom, or chat us if you have any questions.
Am I back on? You lost
You're
me.
back.
Sorry
You're
about that.
back. I lost you for a second, but yeah, go ahead. We lost you when you were talking about Second Muse, that is an accelerator in the US. So.
Okay. Let me share my screen back again. Just reload this. This one, just wait a second. So as I was saying, Second Muse has activities in the US, but also globally, including a $100 million fund to solve the problem of plastics in the oceans. That's based out of Singapore, where we're in partnership with Circular Capital and Circular Partners. Let me just reload my slides. I'm having issues with my internet connection, sadly. Right. I have them in PDF, so I'll just load my PDF. It might be better.
If you want us to share, we can do that as well. Just let us know.
Yes, I'll try to see if you can see if I share my share screen. And that's my. So let me see. Let me know if you see Second Muse here up there.
Yes, that's perfect.
Right.
We're seeing it now.
So I'll leave it like that. And as I was saying, you can see some of the work of Second Muse just by using secondmuse.com work. So I won't go into more details of that. Really what I wanted to showcase this morning is this organizational applied AI, CMM, loosely inspired by the software CMM that some of you might know. It's pretty well known. So thinking through the different stages of how to think about applying AI. And when I say AI, what I'm really talking about are these different branches of AI, from machine learning to NLP, speech, robotics, vision. So thinking about the challenges we have with the climate, to which we could apply some of these different methods to find a suitable solution or innovation. Right, so the CMM starts with zero, like essentially when there's no strategy and no implementation of data collection, right? And as you'll see, the crux of the matter here is around the data. Without data, there's no machine learning, there's no deep learning, there's no reinforcement learning. You have to start with the data. So as you look at an industry, a sector, a specific business, or a specific challenge for the climate, you can think through these different levels. And if the further down you are in this hierarchy, the more chances you are of delivering something that will be super valuable and that will achieve your goals, right? So level one, which is accumulation, and then as you get more maturity, you're able to have retrospective on your data. Real-time processing of that data is the next level. Recommendation, predictive insight, so you have enough data and you have enough real-time processing, and your recommendation have been applied, so you're a certain level of comfort where you can predict. And the last one is prescription and automation. These are the systems where AI decide what to do, and you're confident enough to let them execute the consequence of the processing and the decision that's been reached. So this is, if you look at any industry or any business really, or any startup idea, the key question is how far along is this in its digital transformation? So, and to put you that in context, I'm going to show you different organizations. So for example, in education and healthcare, we're at level 2, right? We have some data, but we're not at the automation phase at all. But if you look at manufacturing and then legal tech, property tech, even design, computer-aided design, we're at the level where we can get some pretty good recommendation from the system that there's a good chance will apply. So these are essentially human augmented processes. As we get into the last slice, like the dark blue slice, where you have advanced manufacturing, but also transportation, med tech, ag tech, we're pretty far along in these sectors in terms of having the system predict and give us a good view of what is most likely to happen. And then the last one, which is the more mature one, these are the industries and the sectors that have been digitized for the longest. So you can think of them as all the information flow has been digitized. So finance, cybersecurity, networking, digital advertising, social media, these are all things that work on autopilot. The algorithms are constantly working in real time, and they're even learning and getting better on their own now that these systems are launched. So that's a way to be thinking about how is this evolving in terms of the maturity of the different sectors. And then I see there's a few QA questions coming. I'll tackle them in a few minutes. If we apply this thinking to climate or to different parts of climate, because really it's pretty broad. So level 0 would be what I call pen and paper science, right? So every knowledge or data that is still on paper, that is still manually collected, and there's less and less of that, but let's call this level 0. And of course, when you find something at level 0 and you think you can bring it to level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, this is where there's super interesting opportunities for innovation, right? Level 1 is what I would call organized accumulation, right? So this is data that is typically stored maybe in Excel or in plain text files, logs, or in databases. So that's level 1. Think about everything that's in a database somewhere. How can you bring it to retrospective, which is also called maybe business intelligence? And in the retrospective category, review trends, we have most of the published research. Climate data is in that category. Risk modeling is in that category. Next level of real-time processing. This is where you get into remote sensors, satellite data, what the folks at Climate Trace are trying to do. What are the data sources that can be collected, analyzed in real time, in which we can get significant perspective and signal out of them. Recommendations is still a challenge with climate. Broadly, because most of the cycles are not real time enough, right? So one of the challenge of doing recommendation is, so for example, the IPCC report is a set of recommendation based on historical data that we have. One interesting example of recommendation is the En-ROAD sim from the MIT, where you could play with different levers and say, if we tax carbon more, what's the likely impact on the number of degrees that will impact or average temperature on Earth? Will it be 1 degree or 3 or 5? So that's one good example of that. The next one, predictive insights in climate typically goes with physical, with data that comes from physics. So all the scientific fields, meteorology, geology, oceanography, everything related to energy, we're pretty far along with predictive insights. So if you have enough historical data, this is you can get to that level within these fields. Of course, this is this is some examples. It's not everything that could be done. And then prescription and automation, we're still not seeing that much of that. It's mostly an industrialized application that we see automation applied to sectors that are related to the climate, either transportation, energy. So there's still a lot of work to be there. And I think here, the key question really is, how is the data created, stored, updated, shared, processed, analyzed? And as you go through these different steps, you're improving these different attributes of the data. So one last slide before we switch to questions. I've been seeing a bunch of different startups applying this at different levels, and hopefully that's inspiring for you as you are working on your own project, or you're looking at projects to join or companies to back yourself. The first one is market making innovation. So this is creating data where there wasn't any good data in the past. So think about my example of pen and paper science. Aquaculture was one such domain if you go back 5 years ago, 5-6 years. And in 2014, I started working with a company called Expertise, who joined our accelerator. They had invented a bucket which was using machine vision to count the number of microorganisms in the water. And Valérie, the CEO, explained to me that the competition was really using a plastic cup and hand counting with your eyes the number of microorganisms that are like a millimeter thick in the water, and saying like, if I have a cup of water here, and if I have a gallon or 100-gallon fish tank, then I'm going to extrapolate that if I see 10 here, there's that many in that one. That's been changing. Now Expertise has raised their Series A. They were backed by Obvious Ventures from California, but also some expert aquaculture funds in north of Europe. So really, really interesting application of some technology that was known, computer vision. They didn't invent computer vision, but they applied the algorithms to aquaculture. And as I'll share these after the talk, you could click on all these names to go explore. The second category is, so you're not creating new data, but you're looking at data in a different way. So I call this data stream from sensors. The first example here, Nectar, applies this to apiculture. So the bees that are used for pollination in agriculture. Nectar is using a series of sensors to get the temperature, the noise, and a bunch of different other signals in the beehive. So the weight, for example. So you can develop pretty good models to tell you, if I have 1,000 beehives in the field, 97% are healthy, and these 30 you should go check out because they have a problem, potentially a problem, because they're not within the range of the signal we're supposed to see. And this is made possible, of course, because of the underlying tech. The sensors are cheaper or easier to get. Cellular technology, low battery, low energy. These are commodities now. So the value is not in the sensor, but in the data you can get with the sensor. But most likely, the value is in what can you understand from the data streams. Next category, which is an extension of the first one, is data to work. So this is for everywhere where there's a lot of data, and agriculture is a good example. Either indoor agriculture in greenhouses or outdoor. There's much more on the indoor side for now, but how can we use the temperature data, the soil, the pH levels, combined with computer vision often, to get, in the case of Motorly, for example, to predict what's going to be your yield for what your crops. So the rate of change, are we on track? Is this going to go, is this growing fast enough or faster or not? Or is this a healthy plant or not? Green Eye is another one that does this in the field. Literally, they're identifying bad seeds. So instead of using pesticides to spray the whole field, which is a total environmental nightmare, they're just identifying the exact plants that have to be removed without harming and without spreading pesticides to the whole field. Next one is flow and efficiency. There's a lot of the startups here that are applied to energy, either electricity use for electric vehicles, the first two ones, ChargeHub and Osiaco. Thermo AI, which is for power plants. So a more efficient use of power plants is, of course, a great way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Or Solam, which is also in indoor agriculture, but they're using programmable LEDs to recreate lighting conditions that are more similar to the natural sun. And because it's programmable, you can say, give me the same sun that we would get in Brazil in a specific month, or give me the level of sun that we would get in Montreal in August. Don't go for the level of sun you get in February in Montreal, you'll be depressed. It's pretty great. And then the last one, I'd like to see more of real-time data and predictions from complex climate models. So I think that we're at a stage now where the techniques and the processing power is available that we can start to tackle more complex models and get more granularity. For example, with talking with climate scientists, the climate model that we have now for temperature prediction, temperature rise, are pretty coarse, and they could be much more granular, but they're complex because you have to consider, for example, wind patterns, which are really hard to model. And then you have to combine 5, 7, 9, 29, 100 different facets of data to get really accurate model. But I think that's sort of like the next level. And in conclusion, one pretty common pattern in learning about applying AI to these different sectors is that you're acting alongside humans. And one of the biggest challenge is actually people who are specialized into something tend to not trust the algorithms. There's a distrust, maybe it's a good thing. So you have to validate your algorithms for at least 2 or 3 cycles. So if you're working on tomatoes and you're growing tomatoes indoor, you probably need a year, because you can have 2 or 3 or 4 cycles of growing tomatoes in a year indoor. But if you're, I'm working with another company that's growing trees, right? It's reforestation, and a cycle is 10 years, 20 years, 30 years to get that tree to the full size. Then if it takes you 3 cycles of 30 years to validate your algorithm, it's going to take you 100 years to know for sure and to get it adopted. So how could you look at, how can you find shortcuts to validate your model faster? And in this case, it's instead of looking at redwood giant trees, applied to bamboo, it goes up much, much faster. It's a better idea. Or at least you'll get validation faster. You still need to grow large trees, but it's a different problems. And then I think the last one is AI alone. Like AI experts or machine learning experts or computer vision experts won't make great progress. You need domain expertise. So the best projects, the best companies I've seen always combine people with deep domain expertise in their sector, who've been working for like 10, 20 years on this specific problem, plus people who can understand the AI and apply it. And then to make this a successful startup, you have to answer the last question. What's the business model? What value do you create that is sufficient and scalable so that you can build a profitable business with a triple bottom line? Will be good for it will be financially sound, it would be good for the environment, and it will be good for people. And that's where we are now. That's sort of like the challenge of proving those models at scale. But I do believe that like many others VCs that are looking at climate tech, that the next 20 years of climate tech is going to be as important and as massive as the last 20 years of the internet. It's our biggest challenge, and we need to tackle it. So in that regard, it will create the biggest opportunities. But we're still trying to put in place the right kind of financial model, but also impact model and impact reporting to make sure that the results that we get are significant enough. Because the worst thing would be to invest a lot of money into something that doesn't deliver the right level of climate impact. And as you know, we're behind. Like most countries are behind. Some are on track, but most countries are behind the IPCC recommendation for greenhouse gas emission reduction. So we're going too slow, and we'll need to go really fast. So you have to be delivering like gigaton results at scale. And we don't have a lot of projects that are there yet. Just a handful. We probably need 100 of these projects and companies to deliver mega results in terms of impact. So that's it for my lightning talk overview. I think we'll switch to questions now.
Thank you so much, Sylvain. This has been an amazing way of understanding a little bit more how to apply maturity models specifically to climate tech, and the examples of these startups were really nice to hear and understand a little bit more what's happening out there, as well with startups that are trying to tackle some of the most pressing challenges that climate change and climate tech can bring. So we do have a couple of questions from our participants. One of them is if Startup Muse or yourself have invested in a Mexican startup.
Not yet. The reason is that we're still working on our investment fund. So we're fundraising ourselves. We hope to be ready in the first half of 2021. The earliest we invest, and that's a general characteristic, we're looking to invest between a few $100,000 to up to $1 million. And typically that's geographically close, right? One challenge with investing internationally is that you have to comply with all the financial and legal regulations of every country you're investing in. So that's why typically funds, especially early stage funds, invest locally or to an adjacent geography. So in the case of the fund we're working with for Second Muse, the next one will most likely be Canada and US. But we could think that if we continue our progress, the next geography we would go in would be in Mexico. So, and I know the startup scene is thriving. I've been following it for several years now. So it's more a question of maybe finding the right partners also locally. So one strategic approach that funds use when they're investing a bit more than a few hours from where they work is to partner with someone local. So, and in the past, I've played that role on the opposite side, bringing in funds to invest for Canada for the first time because we were the local partner that had already invested in a company.
And a follow-up question to that would be, is it okay if Mexican startups apply to the fund in the US if they have a US, they have a US legal entity, right?
Yes, yes. So typically what we want to have is to, because of those regulations, we invest either from if we have a fund that does US and Canada, we'd have like two different halves, and one half would invest in Canadian entity and the other one in US entity. So yes, that's an approach. A lot of the early stage companies that apply to accelerators, for example, in the US, follow this route, right? If you want to go to Y Combinator, I think they even force you to do that, create a Delaware Corp. But it's to consider because I think it's really similar for Canadian startups. When you ask them that question, what do you lose when you change your incorporation country? And there's a lot of benefits typically that are offered by government and programs that you don't have access anymore when you become a foreign company in your own country. So have people help you with that process.
Okay, the second question is regarding whether venture capital changes when you focus on technology for climate rather than just tech for impact.
Yes. We can learn, it does indeed change. Mostly because you have to look at the lessons of clean tech. Sometimes the cycle to get to a validation might be longer, and typical VC funds have a 10-year horizon. So if it takes you 5 years to prove the product and 5 years to prove the market and then 5 years to commercialize it, that's 15, and that's too long for most VCs who have, like, typically it's 10 years. The funds, you have to exit your companies for 10 or maybe extend it a bit. So and this is why what I'm looking at is not so much at the infrastructure level. So for example, for energy, not energy production or even energy storage, but what you can do with data on top of energy. So energy efficiency, energy distribution. So it's really like, so one of my friends called it clean IT, right? So it's really like IT investing, but for technologies that have an impact for the climate. I think the second part is that we're still working on really good models to report climate impact. So how do you define your impact? One good way to do this is to use the impact canvas, impact gap canvas. So what impact are you trying to provide? And then for startups, the impact is in the future, right? So it's a promised impact. And how can you track your goals and your achievement, which is the opposite of ESG or the other, like the sustainable finance typically looks at the past, right? So you look at the public company and what's in the yearly report from last year. When you're working with startups, you have to look at the future, and we don't have really good tools to do that yet. But that's certainly something we want to be investing in.
Okay. Then the next question is, what do you think is the most urgent climate change challenge that we should tackle? There's so many, right?
I think that's the direction I'm going into. That's the direction I'm going into. There's hundreds of ways to attack climate change. And I'm more of the school that we should try 100 because we don't know which one will work. I mean, it's pretty obvious that we will not reduce emissions enough. So direct air capture, everything that has to do with carbon capture, we hear a lot about right now because that's one obvious way to do it. But then where do you store that carbon, or where do you reuse that carbon? There's a lot of innovation still to be done there. But also, I think, as I was mentioning, the consequences of the climate crisis. How do you protect biodiversity? How do you protect nature? How do you reforest? And I think that's one that's close to my heart: reforestation and rehabilitation of land that has been severely degraded, either for agriculture or for mining or for oil and gas. So we need to clean up the mess. So it might not be the most urgent, but certainly the one that's closest to my heart is restoring nature in places where it was destroyed, literally.
And I think that also one of the examples that you mentioned about was this company that does the bee tracking, right? So also like understanding a little bit more about ecosystems and conservation of those ecosystems. It's also a good way of tackling climate change to some extent, because we are so unaware as a human race, right, of how much impact this ecosystem actually have on the way that we live our life in the daily basis, right? So
Yeah,
I think
and
that's
how
another one that can be.
everything's interlinked,
Yes,
and if you're losing the bees, you're gonna lose fruits and nuts and vegetables and
exactly.
cereals.
Okay, and then the last question that we have from our audience right now is, what is the main challenge collecting data to tackle climate change? And I think that's also very interesting. Well, for us specifically from the AI for Climate Initiative, what we're trying to do
Yes.
is understand a little bit more how to run living labs and how to understand where to gather the data from to make sure that those living labs have the sufficient data to run,
Yes,
right?
yes, and I think this is where international cooperation is so important, right? So there's this goodwill, but also social pressure that comes from public money producing public data. And by public, it might not just be in your country, because this is a global problem. This is for everyone on the planet. So countries and regions and cities that collaborate with others, that have this approach of making their data available, but also open source software, algorithms, the process to which they're going through. And this is something we're also seeing private companies embrace. One thing that was really impressed me was how Stripe in the US ran a process, but they published everything on GitHub, like the requirements, the actual files that the companies deposited for their competition. So creates a virtuous circle. So what I hope to see continuing is more international collaboration around data, around algorithms, and around the maintenance of this data, because a lot of the funding for the infrastructures from satellite to sensors is coming from public money. So I think as citizens, but also as activists or hacktivists, we can hacker activists, we can ask for access to that data and work with different bodies of governments to have the data released under licenses that permits reuse and redistribution, ideally.
Yeah, I think that that's one of the biggest examples that I heard recently about, and that I really hadn't thought about, was that, you know, how the internet or how like all of the things that are used in an Apple phone, for example, like were created from public funds and then released to some companies to, to do stuff with that. But now we're seeing like the impact that can have. Again, multi-sectorial collaboration and international cooperation is key to this.
Yes, one of the best thinker on open innovation and government is named Carlota Perez. She's an amazing thinker, and she's published a lot, and she's influenced several investors in terms of how do you mix private money with public sector while still preserving the value of what's been public, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then the last question we have here is, what is your opinion regarding the lack of commitment from governments on a global urgent issue? Because it does look like governments, instead of act for real change, are used as a political strategy. And I wouldn't want to go too political in this conversation, but I do think that it's important to understand a little bit more how we're tackling that as well, and how we, from our own standpoints, I know that we at C-Minds and at AI for Climate as an initiative, we are working with the government. We are trying to get to at least one piece of that institution, right? Because people talk about government, and I don't know, sometimes if we're talking about a specific part of the government or a specific person, it's so much wider than that, right?
Yes. And I think it comes down to putting pressure on governments for accountability, right? And someone gave me a good example of a few weeks ago. With COVID, we have numbers daily, like every week or every day, depending on where you live. Like the government is on TV reporting on the number, what's being done. Imagine if we would do that with climate data. Imagine if they were accountable and every week or every month, we would say, this is our target. Are we on track? Are we missing it? What are the actions that we're putting? They're not accountable because it's seen as a long-term thing. But as we're seeing everywhere in the world now, floods, fires, tornadoes are more severe, droughts, we're living it now.
Yeah.
It's not the future anymore. We're in it now. And if things go the wrong direction, and they're not, it seems they're going in the wrong direction. Like the horizon is 2050. Like this is in not 30 years. All of us on this call will probably be alive to see the consequences of a planet which is a place where you can't really live. That's really bad. So
it's very panicky, right? But I also think I'm an eternal optimist, and I do think that every action from each of us can be part of the solution. And I would say, right, to this answer, my answer to this question would be, well, yes, the government is a huge part because the government can move resources,
yes.
can
and
move
especially private companies, right? Because
private companies as well, people
yes.
and organizations, civil organizations and movements that are happening can be part of this solution as well.
Yes,
so
yes. And I think for every country, you can take, every country can just look at the published sources of the top 5 sources of greenhouse gas emission. And it's probably similar in Mexico, but that's industrial manufacturing, that's commercial buildings, that's transportation, agriculture has some of it, and go prioritize these sectors and put the incentives for those that are positive incentives for those that progress and negative incentives for those that don't.
Yeah, exactly. There's another question that says, do you have an example of a startup working with all the social issues from climate change? I do believe that this is also like a very general question as well.
Yes.
But I don't know if you have an example in mind.
Well, I do have an example. It's not a specific startup, but it's the ecosystem work that Muse is doing in Southeast Asia around plastic. And it's a good concluding thought. What they realize is that the reason there's so much plastic in the ocean is that there's the Southeast Asian countries where the waste management infrastructure didn't follow the growth of the population and of pollution and of trash, right? So the challenge is a challenge of waste management, and you have these huge piles of waste sitting next to the ocean, and when it's windy or rainy, the ocean gets filled with plastic that leaks. And as we analyze this, we realize that the women of these countries were often those that were the most mistreated by this bad system. They were doing some of the job under horrible conditions, economic and social conditions. So we started by improving the living conditions of the women in the industry and helping them become the owners of their businesses instead of working for others and always trying to have a hard time and make the ends meet. Empower them to be entrepreneurs, micro entrepreneurs, but also create solutions that work for them in their daily life. And if this is true, it will create a larger impact, and it will help towards solutions for waste management in this context. So that's a broad example. It's not a specific startups, but directionally correct, I guess.
That sounds like a great initiative as well. And I think that, again, I think that we have a couple of examples of also startups that are doing social change without, I think that's another thing that in entrepreneurship is very misconceived, right? That's startups for impact means like social startups, but not really. I think that there's a lot of examples. For example, this company that is doing the meat that is from cells, right? Like that's such an impact on such a positive impact on the environment, because cattle has such a negative impact on the environment as well. And that doesn't mean that it's a social startup, but it does have a super social impact while it's happening.
And it raised the question
so I think considering that as well.
But as you transform economies and sectors, you have to take care of the people who are who are under the transformation or in the transformation. So education is a big part of it.
And the connection with the local communities, right? So considering specifically who is being part of this, like we're trying to tackle this whatever in where I live, right? The state of Jalisco. Okay, so how are we talking with the communities that live there? How are we talking to make sure that we're not just trying to fix something that for them it might not be broken, like also understanding that perspective. It's super important. But I think that that's all the time we have. And I really, really do appreciate your participation on this lightning talk. I think it was really, really useful for the participants we had, for our audience. And again, we invite everyone to participate in our Global AI for Climate Forum that is going to happen on the 25th and 26th of November. You can find the agenda already on the forclimate.ai/forum website. And for more information on the Second Muse, you can visit secondmuse.org.
Org is or not. Org is we have a foundation that's the .org, but the .com is for all the projects I talked about today.
Okay, awesome. So thank you so much, Sylvain. I don't know if you have any last words before we close this.
Thanks for inviting me, and let's fight this fight together.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. We'll see you next Friday at 10 a.m. Central Time for our next lightning talk.
Thank you. Au revoir.
Au revoir.